So now that we have data into a data frame from all the M-STEP files, and this is assuming that you watched the first video I put out on this, on how to actually import the CSV files, we have a data frame, and I can preview that data frame, the whole data frame this way, and these are all randomly generated birth dates, randomly generated UICs, student numbers. There's no names in here, so this is all fully anonymized at this point for the sake of making this video. But when you pull it in, you'll actually see raw student data. If I just want to see the top 5 rows, I can do this. But as you can see, here's our data frame. We're going to pretend that it's not yet randomized, or rather anonymized, sorry. So the first thing we want to do is I noticed if I open an Excel that some of the fields have an equals quotation on the left and a quotation on the right, specifically these fields. So I wanted to get rid of those. So I do what's called a split, and I take the data that I need from that, I split it on the equals column and the quotes column, or rather equals and quotes characters. Then I drop these sensitive fields that I don't need anymore, and axis is 1 means along the columns, in place is true means I'm not making a copy, and I drop these other unneeded fields that I get, and I end up with the length. So this was based on when I had the raw data, but currently if I do the length of it, it's actually this amount, and that'll make more sense later. So to anonymize, I need some random numbers. I'm going to have 3 random numbers, all the same for this function, random from NumPy. I'm going to round it. I want it to be an integer. And I have another one. This works for the birth date. So before I really get into this, I have to realize that for a given student, I'll have more than one row because I have one row for each content area or subject. So what I need to do is make a temporary data frame where I take one row for each student, and then I'm going to transform the sensitive fields like UIC, student number, barcode, and birth date. And then what I'm going to do is join it back to the original data frame and use those new randomized sensitive fields to set them equal to the original fields. So that's what I'm doing here. I have my temporary data frame, and as you can see, I'm making my random version of each field. To do that, I'm taking the original and I am dividing and multiplying and applying a calculation for each of the random fields that I generated above. And this essentially randomizes the sensitive fields. Here's my time delta that I imported from the first video. And again, this is just randomly changing the birth date. So before I join it back, it's of interest to know for the unique student rows, how many students do we have? In this case, I have 1,562 students. How many schools there were originally? There are 4. In this case, I have 4 CSV files. And so if I divide the former by the latter, I get 390 students per school. Now that's rounded, so there might be some extra ones, and I'll get into that later. Then what I want to do is I want to re-index the temporary data frame, shuffle the index, if you like. So this randomly shuffles the index. And the reason why I want to do that is because I want to actually randomly assign each student to each school. And so that'll make more sense when I join it back to the original data frame. I'm going to drop the sensitive fields that I do not want, and then I'm going to merge it back or join it back to the original data frame. So the left table is the original data frame with the multiple rows per student. The right table is the data frame with just 1 row per student. And it's a left join, so I want everything on the left and whatever matches from the right. I'm joining it on UIC. So at this point, once I do this, I will have a data frame that has on the left everything that was supposed to be there from the original data frame, and on the right it'll pull the fields. Specifically, it's pulling random UIC, random student ID, random barcode, and random birth date. And that's what I'll have. So as you can see, here I have my final data frame. And just like before, the UICs are randomized, student IDs are randomized, birth dates and barcodes are all randomized. There's no last, first, or middle initial names. There's no identifying anything in this file. And it's also shuffled. It's also shuffled in such a way that there's no way you would know which student was at which school, even if you could figure out what row was for which student, which you could not do anyway. So that's how we did that. That was how we randomized and anonymized. I know I didn't go too much into the mechanics of randomly assigning a student per school, and I'll just say briefly that how that worked was I had this new field that I assigned to the temporary data frame, and I had to give it a value to make it a field. And then what I did was, in my logic, I used this location or LOC function or method, which is a filtering method. And I said, if the index is, this is the shuffled index, right? If the index is greater than or equal to I, or the school number, and since Pandas or Python starts with 0 as an index, it starts with 0 and it goes to 3 instead of 1 to 4. So in this case, starting with the 0 loop of the iteration, since we're iterating through this, if the index value, and the index is on the left here, there's always an index in Pandas data frames. If the index value is greater than or equal to 0 times the number of students, so if it's greater than 0 or equal to 0, but it's also less than 0 plus 1 is 1, so the next school, so to speak, times number of students. So in this case, it's 0 or greater, but less than 390, because that's what we want, right? We want 0 to 389. Then we're going to give it school 0. And then we go through the next one. So if it is greater than or equal to 390, but less than the next value, then we give it a 1. And that's how it goes through each of the schools, and you randomly assign students to schools. So I hope that makes sense. I hope it's helpful. And then here I'm just sending it to CSV, anonymous, CSV, rather anonymized. And that's how we anonymize the data. Enjoy.